Hey, good afternoon, good evening, good morning, SPC 205, whatever time you're consuming this little artifact of academic media. I am once again Vic McInnes, your SPC 205 public speaking instructor, coming to you live on tape from my COVID-19 compound here in the heart of the massive Grovetown, Georgia metro area, the Aiken Tech Outpost in lovely Columbia County, Georgia. Hey, our lecture is brought to you today by Sweatpants. If you're in a Zoom meeting, even if you're supposed to be business casual, you can still be wearing sweatpants. Okay, we got two things we're going to accomplish today. First of all, we got a short lecture. I think it's Chapter 2, Ethics. We're going to hit that real quick in just a minute. But first of all, I want to give you guys some feedback on your introductory speeches. So here's the thing about when I give you feedback on speeches. It seems like I don't have anything positive to say. But if it's positive, I really don't need to say it. These speeches overall were very good. In almost every case, I was very pleased, very happy, because the video was of good quality. There were some things we're going to talk about as we go through that I'm going to point out. But in general terms, when you guys always do really well on speeches. So I may sweep by that very quickly in order to get to the constructive stuff we need to work on as we go forward. But in general terms I think I counted and there was 96 speeches. Now there were some I was not able to view because they were marked private or they had age restrictions on there. And I'm trying to scroll down through here and make sure. Yeah, I talk about that later on. So I've got a list here that I will be posting to Blackboard and when I post the announcements for this lecture, so that you'll have these. So don't worry about taking notes. Just listen to what I have to say. First things, let's talk about, I'm going to break it down into three: video issues, sound issues, and then other sort of a miscellaneous sort of thing. Okay? So first of all, a lot of you guys did it, but we had some problems. I need you framed from head to toe and toe to head. Okay? I had a lot. So what I got, and listen, I got my crack graphic design team here at the COVID-19 compound to work on this. So I've got some really high quality graphics here to sort of show you what I'm talking about. Now, I got a lot of these, okay? Where you're kind of, yes, I can see you from head to toe, but you're so far removed, you're like turned on the camera, then like sprinted across. Some of you guys apparently have living rooms the size of a gymnasium. And, we had 30 feet of wall up here over you. It's very hard to see you when you do that. So please, just check your view and then move the camera forward. Okay? Second thing I got a lot of is this, just your head. Okay? Which, again, I'm looking at this on a 17-inch Mac. So just seeing a head that close, it was just a little creepy. And also, I can't see anything about what you're doing non-verbally with that. Okay? So please, not this, not that, but more this. Where your head's, and I didn't put a face on this guy, so this is a little weird. So your head is at the top of the frame, and your feet, not your knees, your feet are at the bottom of the frame. I need you to see you from toe to head and head to toe, okay? That's not a big deal for this speech that's coming up, your 2-minute speech, which I'll be talking about a little bit later. But it will be important for all your other graded speeches because you are going to be graded on that. And if all I can see is your head, and some of you guys were like this, and that is just disconcerting. Okay, if all I can see is your head, I can't tell your posture, your gestures, your weight distribution. Okay, so just be aware of that fact as we move forward. Second thing in video is be aware of the lighting. I've got a ring light clearly here because behind me I have an overhead ceiling, have a ceiling fan that has light, and if I don't do that, and if it's the least bit dark outside, you can't see me because I'm backlit. So please be aware of being severely backlit because it does prevent me from seeing your face. And then last thing on video, don't put the camera on the floor. I know a lot of you guys think there's nothing else you have to do, but put a chair down It's best if you find some way to have it about chest height or maybe a little bit lower, say from the bottom of your ribs to your top of your head, somewhere along there. But if you put it on the floor and you only back up 2 feet, I can see your chin or your head is tilted way down, neither of which is good. Okay, so for video, make sure you're framed from head to toe. Be aware of the lighting and don't put your camera on the floor. Find some way to lift it up roughly chest height. Okay, now for sound, I'm going to recommend you practice with it. Listen to your speech before it's posted. And again, you should also look at your speech before it's posted. But listen to your speech before it's posted, because with as many speeches as we're dealing with, if you post a graded speech that I can't hear you, you're not going to get a good grade on that speech. Okay? Make sure I can hear you. Be aware of background noises. Not a big problem this time. I had one speech where somebody was talking outside and they had to stop to apparently let a convoy of trucks go by. But be aware of that. And if you stop speaking, if you're outside and or there's any sort of background noise, if you stop, your time keeps running. I'm not able to deduct that. That's just part of the deal. So please be aware of background noise issues. And finally, be careful taping outside, because sound dissipates much faster when you're not in an enclosed room. It's just the nature of sound propagation. It will spread out further and faster. So you have to talk much louder. Since I've started doing speeches on tape like this and having them uploaded to YouTube, there is a big problem with people who speak outside not being able to be heard. Okay? So for sound, listen to your speech before you post it to make sure you can be heard. Be aware of background noises. And again, background noises can be dogs, can be kids, can be trucks, can be, like I said, a John Deere harvester. Okay? Those are all things that could be. And then if you're taping out noise, make sure you speak loud enough. All right, so let's turn to some other issues that I just point out, that these are things I see occasionally. So turn on the camera, back up, stop, start speaking. Okay, a lot, I do see now. I know a lot of you guys edit it, and that's great. Remember, I'm only timing you from when you start speaking to when you stop speaking. So the 3 or 4 seconds you need to back up and get in position, 3 or 4 seconds you need to go turn your camera off. Those are not counted against you. Okay, I know a lot of you are editing, clipping those 2 ends. That's fine. But remember, get in place before you start speaking. Don't be talking backing up. Okay. Don't do your speeches seated. If you need to be seated, if you have issues where you cannot stand for 4 to 6 minutes, you need to talk to me immediately. Okay. Do not do your speeches seated. Be observant of time limits. I told you guys, I should have said, your target is 1 minute, not keep it under 1 minute. The shortest one was 13 seconds to answer my 5 questions, which was really phenomenal. You spoke way too fast. We're going to get into that a little bit later on in the course. But be aware of your time limits. That is going to be a major point factor as we go into the graded speeches. Post a link to the video only. Didn't have a whole lot of people do this, but a couple of people sent me files, MP3, MP4 files. I'm not opening those. Don't do that. One person sent me a link to a file server. Not doing that either. I just need to be able to see a YouTube link. For this speech, you're in the next 2 speeches, I just need to see the link. Nothing else. Okay? Don't read from an off-camera script. I saw 2 people doing this, and I always see it. It is so obvious when you've been doing this for as long as I have. Do not read from an off-camera script. That is not going to, we're delivering these speeches with one exception, extemporaneously. We're not going to use scripts unless I specifically tell you otherwise. Okay? So don't post a script off camera and think you can read it. I caught a whole bunch of people doing that last semester. I warned them about it, and when I called them on it, if they were being honest, a couple of people said, yeah, I was doing that. Okay? Do not post notes or a script off camera. Make sure you mark your video public. Now, I got about 6 people, I think, this time that either had their videos marked private or had age restrictions. You need to click, and this is maybe counterintuitive for you on YouTube, when you upload a video, it says, was this made for kids or children? You need to say yes. Okay, that way anybody can view it. All right. Also, if you don't say public, it's going to default to private, and I'm not going to be able to see it. I don't want you to go back and repost. Go back if you think you may have done that. Go back and check and look at where you posted it on the discussion boards. I made a note that it was marked private and I couldn't view it. Don't repost. I'm not going to be able to go back and relook at them. Just be aware as we go forward, if I click on a graded speech link and it's marked private, I have to give you a 0 for that speech. Okay? Just so you're aware. And then finally, try to keep animals, kids, all that stuff out of the frame. Not because I don't like animals. I love animals. I have 2 dogs. I love kids. I have 2 kids. Well, they're adults now. But I've had 2 kids. I love kids, love dogs. But if you have a small child or a dog or something run into the frame, it's going to be distracting for you. Okay, we want to try to avoid those kind of distractions. I am okay. Here's what I'm not okay with. I am not okay with you being distracted, going back and editing the tape. We will not edit. If I see an edit, and unless you guys are running James Cameron level stuff, I'm going to notice a cut. Okay? If you cut and bring something out and edit the tape, that's a 0 because that's not what the point of the class is. But what I will tell you is, if you have a small child, a dog, a ferret, whatever your preference is, run into the frame and distract you, stop tape, start over, do it again. This is what I'm going to advise you over and over and over again. I will tell you to tape and practice. Practice and tape. Okay? If you practice and you get a really good, perfect time, everything went well, post that video. If you do it and you hate it, and you look at it and you go, oh, this was 6 minutes and 5 seconds, he's going to give me a 0 on time, go back and redo it. Okay? All right. That's the feedback. Like I said, people yell at me all the time saying, oh, you're just being negative. No, I'm not being negative. I just don't need to go over all the good stuff you guys did because you're doing it good. Okay? We need to focus on the stuff we need to improve on. Okay. So here we go. All right. Remember, this is me here. Over here is our lecture notes. And what we're talking about today is ethics. And there's a couple of reasons why we talk about ethics. Because number one, I want you to be ethical speakers. I want all my students, even my government students, to pursue and to engage ethically the nature of their studies, okay, and the things we are studying. The second thing I want you to be aware of, and the reason why I want you to be, again, remember, my point, one of my purposes for giving this class and teaching this class is to make you more critical consumers, and we're entering into an election year. And we're going to be talking about the president in this, and I'm not advocating either way, and people will always yell at me that, oh, you're too hard on President Trump. Well, okay, he's the president. He's a big boy. But I also, when I tell you this, I'm just going to be asking you some questions, and I will give you multiple answers. But you need to be able to look at these people who want to run your country for the next 2 to 4 years and ask yourself some hard, critical questions about them before you give them this kind of authority. So let's get started. The First Amendment of the United States, everybody should be familiar with this. It's incredibly important. The key thing is that, it says Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the freedom of exercise thereof or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press. Okay? The First Amendment, after they wrote the Constitution, the very first amendment they passed in the Bill of Rights guaranteed us free speech. But a right has, hand in hand with it, a responsibility. In a key case, Charles Schenck versus the United States, Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes made this part of the majority decision. The most stringent protection of free speech would not protect a man falsely shouting fire in a theater and causing a panic. The question in every case is whether the words used are used in such circumstances and are of such a nature as to create a clear and present danger that they will bring about the substantive evils that Congress has a right to prevent. So what, one of the great justices of the Supreme Court, Justice Holmes, is saying here is that, yeah, you have a right to free speech, but that doesn't mean you have a right to accountability free speech. You don't have a right to consequence free speech. You will be held accountable for what you say. And so what we want to talk about is how we judge some of the, whether or not people are acting ethically, whether or not they're abusing that right to free speech in their talents for speaking. Okay, now this goes back a couple of months ago. Probably everyone was familiar with this. President Trump at a press conference had mentioned that they had done some people within the Center for Disease Control and the the FDA had done some experiments to find that ultraviolet light worked really well against the coronavirus. Also, disinfectants work really well. And then the president said that they were going to be doing some experiment where they would insert lights in the body and that they would inject disinfectants in the body. Now, the next day everyone should know that if you try to drink Clorox or any other disinfectant, it's going to kill you. The next day, when the president was asked about this, he said that he was baiting the press into reporting something like that. A lot of times when he says these really inflammatory, crazy things, he will turn around the next day and say, oh, that was just a joke to see if the press would bite. Well, unfortunately, there was at least one instance where a man died after drinking disinfectants, and his family claimed he did it because he heard the president say it. So, here's the ethical dilemma that we have. Do we accept that the President of the United States can tell jokes about something as serious as drinking toxic chemicals? Or do we hold him accountable and say that's inappropriate for the President of the United States to do? Each answer is equally valid on a continuum, okay? You will each have within your own personal belief systems, hopefully, an answer to that. And neither answer is inherently wrong. But it is how we are going to judge that person. Now, to this day, people who are critical of the president will bring this instance up and say, and you will still hear jokes 5 months later, 4 months later, about people who support the president are willing to inject Clorox into their veins. Clearly that hasn't happened. But the president left himself open to that kind of joking and that kind of ridicule based on the one comment he made. And the question, ultimately boils down, do we want the president of the United States joking, and is that ethical behavior? If he's telling a joke, it's one thing. If he's saying something that he intentionally knows is not true just to tweak the press, is that something we advocate? Okay, so that's the kind of context we're going to be working under. Harvard University President Drew G. Faust said there was a professor that was getting fired, and a lot of people started screaming it was cancel culture. This professor said something that I won't even put up here and tell you what it was about. It was an incredibly offensive statement. And the guy said, well, I was just being offensive to be offensive to get a reaction. And I have a free academic freedom and freedom of speech. Well, Harvard University President Drew G. Faust sort of summed it up. You're free to say what you want. You're also free to take the hits for saying things that are stupid or prejudicial or uninformed. Those two things go together. Okay, and that's how we move forward in this lecture. So the first thing is we ask ourselves, how do we assess somebody's ethics? When we look at somebody and say, are they being ethical? This is how we assess their ethics. The first thing we do is we ask, what's their intent? What's their ultimate goal? One assumes that your reason for doing something is going to be ethical. Okay? Is someone reason for doing something to personally enrich themselves or to better the community, and they make money just as a side benefit of that? Okay, can we easily determine intent for everyone and everything they do? No, not really. Okay, but a lot of times intent is very key in determining whether or not somebody is being ethical. And I'll go back to all of you guys who have children. You lied to your children all the time. Okay, at least most people do. All right, and if you've ever used the phrase boogeyman, you've lied to your kids, okay? If you ever say the boogeyman's going to come get you or Santa Claus isn't going to bring you any presents, your intent was good, and so we will give you a pass, okay? Well, that's all I need to say about that. The next thing we look at is the means or the method and how you accomplished it. If you want something good and you lie, can you defend the lie? Can you defend the means in relation to your intent? Okay, and then finally, we look at the ends. What's your desired outcome? Okay, if I go in and I tell people that we need to build, and I start a campaign to build a new wing to the Aiken Regional Hospital, and I do that, and everything I say is true, my intent is good, the means is good, but the ends is not so that my sandwich shop that's located next to the hospital will get more customers. I could care less about how many people are treated in the hospital. All I want is sell more sandwiches. Okay? Did that make me ethical? There's no, and when you get to ethics, there's no right answer. Okay? So what we're going to discuss next is a couple of ethical models. There are several. There's a couple that show up in every book. There's two that show up in every book that we're going to discuss. And then there's one that I use that I derived from Aristotle. We're going to talk about Aristotle again. First thing we want to talk about is ends justify the means. That says that in order to get something good, you may do something bad. Okay, in order to move listeners to a just or desirable end state, a speaker, by whatever means, or will use whatever means are available to help them succeed. They hide their true emotions. They may use twisted reasoning. They may use emotional appeals. And again, there's nothing inherently wrong with emotional appeals, but to use overtly emotional appeals and overly emotional appeals. And again, misusing information. So, good example of this, and again, when the President of the United States in 2018 were saying these massive caravans of undocumented aliens were coming to the United States, there was ample evidence to believe at that time that those caravans were never going to make it to the U.S. border, which they did not. Okay, those caravans had been seen multiple times before. They usually found a place somewhere between, wherever they were leaving from in Central America, but as they were going through Mexico, they usually just sort of dispersed and dissipated. Okay, now the people that we're working with in the administration were stoking fears that there was going to be this invasion, and they used that term, this invasion, on more than one occasion. Was that justified? Was that an ethical thing to do? You're going to have to answer that question for yourself. I have my response. You'll have to answer that question for yourself. But the morality or the ethics of ends justify the means is determined by the speaker, but it will be reviewed by the public. Okay? You will not get to decide whether you are not the sole person who decides whether or not the ends justify the means. That is going to be turned over to other people to make a determination. Okay? And then ultimately, when do you use it? Well, that's, again, an ethical decision that you're going to have to make. All right? The next one we're going to talk about is situational ethics. And that's where, and just like it says, the situation will dictate. Situational ethics is based on the premise that there are no natural laws, no moral absolutes. We do what we have to do to get by. We all use situational ethics. Okay, when your significant other comes down, walks into the living room and is wearing something that just is hideous, and they look at you and say, "Do I look good in this?" Usually, we're going to say, "Yeah, that looks great. Can we go? It's late." Okay, we use situational ethics all the time. And again, parents, when you go to your child's first piano recital and they sound like they're hitting the keys with a baseball bat, what do you tell them when they come off the stage? That was fantastic. You were the best one in the recital. And is that true? Hell no, it's not true. But you have a good reason for being dishonest. It's building your child's confidence up. Okay? But the problem is that in every situation, there's differences. And again, we may not be the people that at the end of the day get to judge our own actions and whether or not our reading of the situation was appropriate. Also, situations change. Okay? And we have to answer for the way we acted in the past based on situations that are no longer in place. All right, and then finally, the ultimate situation ethics is, in the example that always comes up, after World War II, during the war crimes trials, Nazis who had worked in the concentration camps and had executed Hitler's final solution said over and over and over again, "I was just following orders. They told me to do it, and I did it. And it was just, you don't know what it was like living in Nazi Germany. And the same thing happens in almost every dictatorship. It happened with people that I was very familiar with in Iraq after Saddam fell. They all said, hey, Saddam had us all terrified. We just did what we had to do to survive. Do we accept that? Well, there's going to come a point where when you're talking about things like genocide, where no, people are not going to accept the situation made me do it. Okay? So situational ethics is something we use every day, but remember, and I will tell you, the situation will change. If your significant other goes out with something that looks really, really awful, and they figure that out while they're at a party, when you come home, your situational ethics are going to be challenged. Speaking from personal experience. Now, the one we're going to work on is credibility-centered ethics, and we're going to tie this in, and this is something that I've been familiar with. We're going to tie this in with Aristotle in just a minute. An individual will be held accountable for their rhetorical choices. If they misuse their skill and ability to persuade, it will negatively impact their ability to persuade in the future. Okay? Real simple. If you lie to me today to get something, when you come back to me tomorrow, I'm going to think you're a liar. Doesn't make any difference if what we got from yesterday was good. I am going to have to accept that you're going to lie to me, and I've got to put a lot of faith in you. Otherwise, you're just a liar. Okay? Now, a lot of people, and then you have to determine where their credibility is in the weight you're putting on things. Okay? So, if you misuse your abilities today, you're going to be held accountable for it later. And you won't be seen as credible. Now, if we go back to Aristotle, Aristotle said that there were 3 ways to persuade someone, and they were used in combination, and you should all be familiar with these from English 101. The first is pathos. Pathos is an emotional appeal. Pathos is where you engage someone emotionally. Persuasion may come through the hearer when the speech stirs their emotions. Pathos, the biggest example of pathos is a commercial that I will literally turn the channel on. It's that Sarah McLachlan, Americans Society for Prevention of the Cruelty. When she comes on and goes, in the arms of an angel, and then you see just 30 seconds of dogs that are sick. That's pure, and you're picking up the phone, giving them your money. That's pure emotion. That's pure pathos. Aristotle said you need to combine that with logos. And the logos is persuasion that is effected through the speech itself when we have provided a truth or an apparent truth by means of persuasive arguments suitable to the case in question. The easiest way to think of logos is evidence and logic. Okay? So if we have pathos, emotion, logos, evidence and logic, we got 2 out of the 3. Okay? So pathos, emotion, logos, logic. The third is ethos. And you'll hear me talk about ethos a lot in the class. Ethos is the speaker's personal character when the speech was so well spoken as to make us think them credible. Ethos is persuasion based on your personal credibility. Give you an example of ethos that really, and this is another commercial that bothers me. And those of y'all, I haven't seen him in a while. But if you live in the CSRA and you've been here for about 2 years, you've seen there's an attorney called George Sink. Okay? And George Sink used to run these commercials where it was like 10 people all staring creepily dead-eyed into the camera going, George Sink was a United States Marine. I had George Sink take my case and I got $1 million. George Sink was a United States Marine. George Sink was a Marine and Marines are fighters and George Sink will fight for you. George Sink is a United States. And it just goes on like that for like a minute and it's creepy. But what they're trying to say is that George Sink, we give Marines, United States Marines, personal credibility. We give them credit for being upstanding individuals. And if this lawyer used to be a Marine, you can trust him. Okay? Now, here's the important thing here. You need to remember these. Aristotle said that these 3 are all important. The best way to persuade is through employing pathos, logos, and ethos. But he said the most important was ethos. Because if you don't have personal credibility, you can't persuade anybody of anything. Okay? If you think I got a cousin, and the guy's just, he's just a horrible person. Okay, and if my cousin came up to me and said, "Listen, I'd like you to sell you this 1968 Camaro. It's in perfectly running condition. I'm going to give it to you for $2,000." I could crawl all over under that thing. I would look under the bottom. I would take it apart. I would have a mechanic look at it, and he would look at me and say $2,000. And my mechanic could tell me that car's worth $60,000. I'm still not going to buy it because that cousin has no credibility with me. Yeah, I would still hesitate to give him the $2,000 because I know that tomorrow night he's going to come back and steal it and chop it for parts. It's hot and he's got a fake something. That guy has no credibility with me, so he's never going to be able to persuade me. So let's talk about how we can be ethical, and I'm going to tell you a story about a student who was not ethical. First, be honest, be truthful. Very simple. Tell the truth. If you are on the right side, you should not have to lie to get your point across. Along those same lines, have integrity. Build your case with honesty and trying to not twist evidence or twist positions, and be truthful and have integrity. Be fair to the other speakers and be fair to your listeners. Really importantly, be fair with your listeners. Remember, we're in a dialogue with our listeners. And if you're not fair to them, sooner or later, they're going to find out about it. Show respect for everyone. This is one thing we're lacking today. But I do believe that over time, if you build your case on insulting and demeaning other people, eventually that's going to come back to haunt you. And then finally, be accountable for your actions. If you screw up, look people in the eye and say, you know what? I screwed up. I shouldn't have done that. You have my apologies. Okay? I found out last week that the information I had given you previously was incorrect. I've done this in class on many occasions. Especially times, I've had students where, especially when I'm teaching political science, and the courts are updating issues all the time. I've had students come in and say, hey, listen, what about this? I found this court case. And I said, let me look into it. I'll have to read about it. Give me the data, and I'll go back and I'll come back in the next week and say, hey, you know what? I made a mistake. There's a more up-to-date court case that I gave you thanks to Mr. Smith here. Okay? And I will go back and update. I won't, I've had instructors that will say, don't you dare anyway. Okay? So be accountable for your actions. All right, that's the end of lecture 2. All right, let me tell you real quick about my student who was not ethical. A couple of semesters ago, I had, you've seen that list of speeches I will not allow you to give, topics that are just too confrontational, too explosive. And I got an outline in on a Friday that said, hey, listen, I want to do this, and I'm not going to tell you what the topic was, but I wrote back to her immediately and said, I've already said many times, you can't do this topic. You can't touch on this topic. Actually, I had 2 on the same day. One student took it and went, great, fine, get you a new topic. This other student did not write back. She came into class and she said that she opened her speech with her attention device was, when I was told I couldn't do my first topic, I actually thought about, as I was sitting there contemplating my life and my existence, I thought about ending my life. And I was like, and you could hear audible gasps from the audience. Okay, and then she gave the rest of her speech, and I won't get into what the speech was about. It was okay. She gave a pretty good speech. But then she came over and she said, I held her up after class, and I said, okay, I need to ask you, and I've had to do this a couple of times in my life, and I have to ask you, are you thinking of harming yourself? She goes, oh, no, I said that just to make a point. Okay, well, she got to go talk to a couple of people on campus because that is unethical. She lied, or she was dishonest. I'm not going to say take the lie is a very judgy word. She was very dishonest about something in order to make a point in a speech. And though I made a decision in consultation with my department chair and the dean not to penalize her for the grade, she did get a lot of time to talk to my department chair about ethics. She talked to some other people about mental health issues and why we should take those seriously, and they're not something to throw around. Okay, so if I find out you're misusing evidence and you're being unethical, okay, I will call you on it. That's why I pay very close attention to ethics, because this is something we need to have built into our public speaking every day. And I want you to look at people and saying, wow, That's not factually correct, and he said it anyway. Okay, because we do need to hold those people accountable, because if you let people get away with being dishonest, that is just going to convince them that they can do it anytime they want to, and then facts become irrelevant. Okay, Daniel Patrick Moynihan, who was a congressman senator from New York for a long time, said people are entitled to their own opinions, but they're not entitled to their own facts. Okay, all right, that is lecture number 2 in the bag: ethics and how to be ethical and being more critical in listening to speeches to see if people are being ethical. That will be it for the day. I will put out a note when you don't have a speech due this week. It'll be due next week. I'll be putting out some more details on that. I'm also going to mention in the announcement when I post the link to the speech. Okay. All right. If you have questions, of course, you can email me. If you want to set up a Zoom office meeting, I will be happy to do that with you. So until then, stay safe, stay well, and we will see you soon.